All of our virtual community programs are available for on-demand viewing on our YouTube channel, accessed by going to our website and clicking on the YouTube icon in the upper right-hand corner. They're there so that you and your friends worldwide can enjoy these programs at your leisure. We do have costs for these programs, so any donation you can make would be most appreciated. Donations support not only our community programs, but our numerous field trips, education programs in local elementary schools, conservation activities, Sweet Springs Nature Preserve, scholarships for bird camps, and interns at High Mountain Condor Lookout Project, among other things. So before we begin the program, please make sure that you are muted. And if you don't want everyone to see you scratching your nose, you should probably turn off your video. So on to tonight's program. Pacific Wildlife Care, PWC, is San Luis Obispo County's only licensed rehabilitation center that cares for injured birds, mammals, and reptiles. PWC also maintains a wildlife hotline that the public can call to report distressed wildlife, injured, sick, orphaned, and to receive information about local wildlife. In this presentation, longtime PWC volunteer Claudia Duckworth will show us what's happening behind the scenes at the rehab center, and will explain how the animals received by the center are treated, cared for, and rehabilitated. Claudia's been a volunteer for PWC for about 30 years and has served in multiple capacities, including answering the phone hotline, working in rescue and transport, participating in the baby bird program, and serving on the board. She currently volunteers at the center and is the leader of the creance team. Creance is used as a method of pre-release conditioning for raptors. Claudia also houses and does programs with Corax, the PWC Education Raven. So it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce to you Claudia Duckworth.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here talking to the Morro Coast Audubon Society. Both the Society and your members have been great supporters of Pacific Wildlife Care over the years. I think most of you are familiar with Pacific Wildlife Care, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going into our background. Our center is in Morro Bay, so I think a lot of you have possibly brought animals to us. If you could actually come into our center, what you would see is a lot of people working separately at different tasks in a shared sense of purpose, which is to provide the very best care we can for the animals that come to us. So we are the only organization in San Luis Obispo County that rescues and rehabilitates native wildlife. We're a nonprofit, and we rely mostly on donations and community support. We don't rehabilitate marine mammals. That's the Marine Mammal Center, who are also on the PG&E property next to us. They have a triage center there. We also don't do bear, mountain lions, or adult deer, but we pretty much do everything else. I'm going to go through some of these pretty quickly. So our center, we actually started in 1986, but the center opened in 2007. Up to that time, we were just rehabbing out of our homes. And quite honestly, we were not doing a very good job. We were trying to learn how to take care of these animals. I'm happy to say we've gotten a lot better since then. We are open every day of the year. We accept animals from 9 to 5, and those times actually get extended in the summer. We are one of 12 primary care facilities for the Oiled Wildlife Care Network, which is an agency of the state government, and they did help fund our current center. In the case of an oil spill, they could come, and an oil spill in our area, they could come and actually take over our center to use it to respond to that oil spill. We've had a full-time veterinarian since 2013, Dr. Shannon Riggs, and we knew we wanted Dr. Riggs because before she came and actually we had the money to hire her, she was working at another facility in Northern California, and she would come down on her weekends at her own expense and help us as much as she could every weekend. So we knew that if we ever had the money to hire a veterinarian, she was going to be our vet. We have 7 paid staff. It includes our most recent hire, which is our executive director, Christine Johnson. Some of you may know her. And then the vet, the clinic manager, and we have 4 rehabilitation technicians. In 2021, we had 168 volunteers covering multiple tasks, from the hotline to rescue transport to working in the clinic. Other tasks include our education team, administration, public relations, and board positions. 88% of our budget goes directly to animal care. In 2022, we saw 2,793 animals, 207 species. 70% were birds, 29% were mammals, and the rest were reptiles and amphibians. And those percentages remain pretty much the same no matter how many animals we see. That's 70% birds and about 30% mammals is pretty consistent. So these are just our annual intake numbers. 2006 was before we opened the center, and then the numbers pretty much stayed the same until around 2013, 2014, when the numbers started to increase up to 2015. And I sort of attribute that to cell phone availability and internet, and people could find us more easily. And then the numbers have stayed fairly consistent since then. We did have a big jump in 2022. I asked our clinic manager if he had any particular reason for that, and he didn't. He said it was across the board. It wasn't any particular species or more babies or more adults. It was just across the board. We just had more animals. So there are a lot of reasons that we get animals, and unfortunately, most of them have to do with human activity. We get birds and mammals hit by cars, songbirds caught by cats, seabirds entangled in fishing line, hawks and owls caught in barbed wire or shot, eagles and turkey vultures poisoned by lead, birds covered in oil, and orphaned mammal babies or trapped parents. The good thing is that it's always people who bring us these animals, and they are usually dismayed at the harm that has been caused them. So it's a great opportunity for us to talk to them about things like maybe keeping their cats indoors, considering that we're all cat lovers, and we're concerned about the cats, and we're also concerned about the wildlife that the cats kill. We can talk to them about not using poisons, not using those horrible sticky traps, which I wish were illegal. So there's always some good that comes out of these sad situations. So this is what our intake normally looks like. It actually has not looked like this for a number of years. First of all, because of COVID, we stopped having people come into the clinic, and we would meet them outside. Now that COVID is waning, we have the highly pathogenic avian influenza that we are again not having people come into the center. We actually have a triage tent that is set up on the side of the center. So any susceptible animals are taken into that triage tent before they ever come into the center. If we would get HPAI in our center, we could be closed down. And all of our animals possibly would have to, that's a worst case scenario, but it could happen. So we're very careful. The staff go out and examine the animals in PPE. And if it's an animal that is suspected of HPAI, they are euthanized out in the tent. Otherwise, they may be observed for a while before they're ever brought into the center. And we have had a number of cases of HPAI that have been confirmed through necropsy. So this is where it's normally, under normal conditions, this is where it would start. And when someone brings an animal, or one of our rescue transport people go out to get an animal, we bring them in and we get essential information at the beginning. We get the name, address, all of that contact information. And then we get information about the animal, exactly where the animal was found. If they noticed anything about the animal that might help us, that the animal was limping or the animal was dragging a wing. We want to know if they've done anything with the animal, which we hope that they have not, but a lot of people do try to treat or feed animals. For babies, we want to know if if the parents were present. For crows, we want to know exactly where they got the crow and at what time of day, since crows have a regular schedule that they follow. So if we want to get them back to their flock, we would want to know the exact time and where those crows were. So there's a lot of information that is gathered at this point. They're also given a number that they can then call the center and check up on the animal that they turned in. It's a unique number. We use a database called WRMD that was created by 2 rehabbers. It's a wonderful system. It's free, and they've made it free, and it's widely used by a lot of wildlife centers all over the country. It records lab work, medications, toxicology, and progress notes. And it also allows you to automatically send reports to state Fish and Wildlife and federal Fish and Wildlife, which we are required to do on an annual basis. And for us, also to the Oiled Wildlife Care Network, because every oiled bird we get, we report to OWCN. So that's where a lot of the entries, and the WRMD entries will follow the bird from the time it comes in until the time there is a disposition one way or another. We also have charts that follow the animals and that are kept by the crate or the enclosure where the animal is. And those just record things like feedings and medications given, weights. And those are mostly done by volunteers. A lot of the entries in WRMD are made by the staff and the veterinarian. This is our intake room. So usually animals that come in are quite stressed, and we will often let them sit. They've been injured. They've been grabbed by us, a predator, and put in a box of some kind and then transported in a car. So they're often quite stressed. So we often let them just chill for a while. We keep all the crates covered, as you can see, to reduce stress. And then once we're ready to examine them, we usually will warm them up before we examine them. And the exam will take blood for information that blood can give us. We will check for broken bones, wounds, parasites. All of those things will be treated if it's appropriate at that time. Sometimes an animal is too weak or stressed to actually get treatment, so that some of that treatment may wait. Blood values give us a lot of information, and one of those is whether the animal can eat. And so at this time, there'll be a treatment plan decided on, and that will include the kind of enclosure the animal needs to be in, what kind of food they will be given, and where in the center they'll be put. And then if it's not a vet who's doing the examination, a vet check may be scheduled if it is needed. So sometimes it's really obvious what's wrong. This is a pelican that had this giant fish stuck in his throat. And sometimes it's not so obvious. So this is a pelican, and you can see we keep their heads covered, and we're checking for any injuries to the wing in this case. This is just a fun picture of the talons of a golden eagle to see what they're like. And you can see this eagle has a hood on, and we do hood the raptors because you can get hoods for raptors. You can't get hoods for all birds, but you can for raptors. So it's a good way, rather than using a towel, we can actually hood them for exams. This is that same eagle without his hood. We are able to do a lot of diagnostics, our vet is, and then there are some that we do need to send to an outside lab. We were one of the first groups to get a lead testing machine because we were getting so many lead poisoned animals, and the tests were taking so long to get back to us. We were waiting to treat the animal. The animals are often in really very sad shape. They're quite sick when they're lead poisoned. Usually their legs are paralyzed, their digestive systems are paralyzed. And they're sick. And so we got tired of waiting to find out. So we got our own lead machine, and it's an instant result, and it requires a very little bit of blood. So we've been doing that ever since we opened the center. We've been testing for lead. And usually the animals we test are eagles and turkey vultures. Those are mostly the birds that we get, but if another animal showed symptoms, we would certainly test it for lead poisoning. This is our whiteboard, and the whiteboards are really quite wonderful once you learn to use them. They carry an enormous amount of information. So our whiteboards are color-coded, as you can see here. And there are different whiteboards throughout the center. So this one happens to be for the seabird room. And so you read it across horizontally, and it'll tell you the number of the animal, the species, what illness or injury it has, where it is located, what medication it's on, the feeding schedule, and any tests or exams that are needed. So it's just a great quick look to see what's happening with an animal. And the boards are updated every day by the staff. So these are Pelly boxes, and a lot of the things that we use at the center were discovered at oil spills, because when you're working at an oil spill, you're dealing with a whole lot of animals and you have to be able to deal with them efficiently. And so they come up with great ideas. This is called a Pelly box, and it's the inside of just a wooden frame that the walls and the ceilings are tarp, so that an animal that is going to try to get away from you when you go in, which is just about every bird, and they slam into the walls, they're not going to hurt themselves. They're cheap to build, they're easy to build, and we love them. So we've got several of these in that intake area that you saw, because usually the animals that are in here are being treated. They're either on meds or wounds are being treated. So this is a green heron and a turkey vulture, and we use them for everything. We put everything from gulls to eagles. Right now we have a hummingbird that's set up in one. So they're very useful. This is our seabird room, and the seabird room was originally set up for warm water pools and for washing seabirds. As you will see with everything at the center, everything has to be flexible, because depending on need, we may use this for something completely different. In this case, you can't see it very well, but there is a desert tortoise in there that's in one of the pools. These warm water pools, they have an overflow so that the water is continually being cleaned, and the temperature can be controlled all the way up to 100 degrees if we need it that way. And there are also crates in the seabird room. It's a quiet room and it's a warm room. So we also put birds that need quiet and warmth in here as well. And these are the pools. They're big plastic pools that have curtains around them. And in this case, we've got a haul out in there for these murs, so that if they feel the need to get out of the water, a lot of the birds that we put in these pools are not completely waterproof. And although we want to keep the birds in water as much as we can, sometimes they need to get out because they start to get cold and they will panic. And so these haul outs allow them to get up out of the water and preen if they need to do that. And this is a northern fulmar up on one of the haul outs. And the haul outs are netted bottoms, which we use a lot with seabirds because they somewhat protect their keel, which is not used to being on a hard surface. So let's see. So this is a ruddy duck that's in one of our pools, and a bufflehead. This is a long-billed curlew. Now he's not going to be in a pool, but he was in the seabird room for the warmth and quiet. This is a pied-billed grebe, and you can see we suspend dishes in the pools and put fish in them. And we have to have several types of fish because we have to use fish that are not very oily for our pelagic birds, because they're sitting in the water where they're eating the fish. So of course the oil is getting in the water and can get on their feathers. So we use night smelt for the pelagic birds, and then for the other birds like pelicans and gulls, we use capelin or anchovies, which are quite a bit oilier, but it's not as much of a risk to the birds because they're not sitting in the water that they're eating in. this was a long-tailed duck. This is kind of a sad story. This beautiful long-tailed duck came to us, and he had leg paralysis and some wounds, and those healed. And this is just sort of a story about feathers. Unfortunately, he had poor feather condition, and birds that are used to being in water just will not do well if they're out of water. And this bird could not get in water. And although we tried, our vet actually tried a method of inducing a molt, but it was not successful. And we ended up having to euthanize this bird just because of the feathers. It was heartbreaking. She was such a beautiful bird. So when we get oiled birds, we do have to report them to OWCN. So we take a picture and send this to OWCN, and this is our vet, Dr. Riggs, and this whiteboard shows the species, the date, where the bird was found, the bird's number, and then it's a picture of the bird. And we also send feather samples to OWCN. They can actually track oil. They can tell you if it was from a ship. They can tell you where that ship was from, and that ship can be held responsible for the oil spill. In our case, almost all of the animals that we get, it's naturally occurring oil, and we get them throughout the year. So we get really pretty good at cleaning oiled birds. We also get birds that are contaminated with like cooking oil. We get gulls that come in smelling like French fries because they've fallen into a vat of cooking oil. We get birds that have fallen into sewage, and then those horrible glue traps. Those are not reported to OWCN. So seabirds, when you get a seabird, you're really on a timer where the clock is ticking down, because the longer that bird is out of the water, the more damage is going to be done to the bird. So what happens with birds like this western grebe and loons in particular, but other birds as well, fulmars and some of the sea ducks, they will start to develop problems with their joints because their legs are not dangling in water, but they're up, and the joints start to develop problems. The feet are very tender. They're used to being in water, and on a hard surface, they start to develop sores. And then their keel, which is used to being on water, now on a hard surface, will develop keel sores, which are like bed sores. And they're very hard to heal. So we don't want them. We do everything we can to prevent them. And so one way is to put booties on the bird. And then this, you can't see it, but it's a rolled towel that's shaped like a donut. And the bird's keel is set inside that towel. And then it's strapped to the bird's body. And then they're also put on netting, suspended netting that is suspended on a PVC frame. So all of those things are done to try to prevent this deterioration of the bird. But the main thing we want to do is get the birds in water. And today, for example, we had an oiled grebe, and we put him in a warm water pool. And sometimes the birds will stay in water if it's warm enough and they don't feel that cold water starting to hit their skin, and they'll stay in the water for a while. And then eventually we wash the bird. Anyway, those are some of the things that we do with these birds. This is washing a bird. The road to washing a bird is a long one. First, the bird has to be strong enough to go through the wash, and that's determined by the bird's body condition and by blood work. There are certain parameters that have been studied, and we know pretty much will indicate whether a bird can withstand the wash. And it's not just the stress of the wash the bird has to withstand, but the bird then has to get himself waterproof, and it's a lot of work. And so he has to have the strength to not only withstand the wash, then he has to be able to do the work that it's going to take to get himself waterproof. So our job is to get those feathers clean. And I love to wash birds. I don't like seeing oiled birds, but the pleasure of getting that awful oil off this bird that has been preening to try to get this oil off unsuccessfully. So his beak has got oil in it. He may have burns on his legs and in unfeathered areas from the petroleum, which does cause burns. In some cases, it's so bad that we have to euthanize the bird, but if not, and we can wash the bird, that's great. So we actually sedate the birds, and we use a drug called midazolam, which is the same drug that you may have had given to you if you've ever had a colonoscopy. It puts you into kind of a twilight zone, and you don't have any memory after it wears off, which is very nice for a colonoscopy. And for the birds, we actually reverse there's a drug that reverses the effect of the drug. So after we wash them and the bird has to then start preening, we reverse the drug so that they are then able to preen. And we found over time that it works really well, and the birds seem to do well with that. So the wash is I won't go into all the what goes into a wash, except to say that we use water at 110 degrees and we use it at a high pressure. And then we use soap and another oil to break down the petroleum, and then a rinse. And the rinse is really important. And when you get to the rinse and you're spraying the bird hard with water, the feathers get this beautiful sheen to them and they fluff up under the water. And it's such a miraculous thing to see. And I have a friend who was a rehabber who wrote a poem about a crabbing ship in the Arctic, and there are suits on board. So if the ship should go down, people have 5 minutes to get into those suits or they will die in the coldness of the water in the Arctic. And this ship is being tossed in the storm, and the lights of the ship are falling on the waves, and they light up the tops of the waves, and there are fulmars and common murres asleep. And to me, that just really describes the miracle of feathers, because they really are quite miraculous. So this was well, let me just finish. So, but what the bird has to do after the wash is they have to preen their feathers, and what they do is they're hooking their feathers together. That's how they get waterproof. Feathers have little barbules and hooklets on them, and they hook together like Velcro. And the bird has to pull those feathers through his beak and get those feathers all aligned and hooked together, and that's how he gets waterproof. And it may take several days. He may get partially waterproof. We'll put him in a warm water pool. He'll be comfortable for a while, and then he'll start getting wet in certain spots. We'll take him out, we'll put him under a dryer, he'll preen some more, and he'll get more of those feathers aligned, and then there'll be less spots. And that can go on for maybe 2 or 3 days while that bird is getting more and more waterproof. And the goal eventually is that he'll be able to withstand the warm pool. We'll cool that pool down, and then we'll put him out into our outdoor pool. And then eventually he'll be diving in our outdoor pool, and we'll be able to release him. So that's sort of the scenario for what happens with an oiled bird. This was a sad case of, I need to get you some happy cases, but this one was some green-winged teal that dived into a pool of oil in Coalinga, and our vet drove at 10 o'clock at night to pick up these 13 birds. We brought them back. We desperately tried to clean them. They had actually gone under the oil, and they had it in their eyes and their mouths and their throats. And unfortunately, none of them survived, but we tried. So this is where we do our dishes. And the dishes go through a process of, we wash them with soap, and then we rinse them and spray them with a product called Rescue and let them sit. That kills bacteria and viruses, and they're rinsed and then dried. This is where we prepare our food, and because we do so many animals, we have to have all kinds of foods. So we have to have fish slurry and elemental diets for omnivores, herbivores, carnivores. We have formulas for the baby raccoons, bunnies, squirrels, opossums, fawns, and then whole food for juvenile and adults. And that includes fish, mice and rats, berries, nuts, fruits, quail, crickets, mealworms. It's just just having the food itself and maintaining the food is a job in itself. These are our freezers. You can see where we keep our mice and our quail, and then we keep the other food here. And it's mostly the volunteers who do this kind of work. So I want to give credit to all these volunteers who do things like the laundry and the washing of the crates and stuff. So we have a laundry room. We have 2 washing machines and 2 dryers. We try not to use the dryers if the weather permits us to hang the laundry outside. It's never ending. The dishes are never ending and the laundry is never ending. This is where we clean the crates, and we have volunteers who come in just to clean crates. And they may do it for several hours to catch up on the piles of dirty crates. We now use soft-sided crates for the birds, and that's really helped to prevent injuries, but they don't last as long. They need to be replaced. But they go through the same process that the dishes do, which is washing with soap and water, then spraying with rescue, and sitting, and then being rinsed and dried. This is the baby bird room. The baby bird room has a dual personality through about 5 months out of the year. It's pretty quiet with a few adult passerines and some doves and pigeons. And then for 7 months out of the year, it's utter chaos with so many babies wanting to be fed. And the babies are arranged according to how often they're being fed, from 15 minutes up to 2 hours and everywhere in between. So we have the baby bird room. It has shifts, and it usually has a lead member who runs the room for the day. And let's see. So this is one of our volunteers feeding some babies in an incubator. If they come in and they can't maintain their body temperature, they would go in the incubator. And the tapping, we think maybe it reminds the babies of the adult landing on the nest. It's not clear why, but it does encourage them to gape. And then we do have books to, along with the lead in the baby bird room who will mentor people. We have books on things like how to build a perfect nest. And this one is on how to set up a basket for a particular species, and the kind of enrichment you can put in the basket, and where the food should be located. And so there's pages like this for every species. So this is an orphan black-headed grosbeak. This was a nest of northern flickers that a construction company got permission to remove the nest, and so they brought these babies to us. So we raised them and released them. You need permission from the Department of Fish and Wildlife to tamper with the nest at all. Here's a great horned owl nestling. We just got 4 nestlings from somewhere near Taft, where the parents apparently had been killed. And so we have our first 4 great horned owl nestlings right now. This is a nest of finches. And we often get a full nest. They come in from the valley. They'll come in hay trucks or in horse trailers. People don't realize they were there. So the parents, of course, are nowhere nearby. And so we end up raising them. Or sometimes a whole nest will just fall and we can put it back. Or we can create a new nest if the nest is no longer viable. And you can see where the babies back up and poop on the sides of the nest. They actually do that. They do that when they're naked and blind. It's remarkable to keep that nest clean. This is a northern saw-whet owl fledgling and some cliff swallow fledglings. And we do have to be cognizant of getting these cliff swallows out before they migrate and before they form their flocks to migrate. And we have actually driven swallows down as far as San Diego when there are no flocks around, and the nearest ones are in San Diego, and so we will take them wherever we can find them because we don't want to overwinter them. This is a California quail, and there are some ladies who knit these wonderful nests for rehab centers, and I don't know who they are, but they knit all sizes. We use them constantly, and they are wonderful. We are very grateful to them. This is a snowy plover chick. Some baby western gulls. Those are the only gull babies we get. This is a red-tailed hawk nestling. This is one of my favorites, a white-throated swift. Western screech owl. People think these are baby great horns. This was a cute story. We could not, we try to never raise a baby alone, but we could not find a companion for this black-necked stilt. We tried rehab centers all over the place, couldn't find them. So we finally decided to put him with some orphan killdeer chicks. And it worked out beautifully. They became best buddies and eventually were released. This was a juvenile turkey vulture that was found with 2 broken legs out in a field, and our vet pinned his legs, and we released him after 45 days in care. These are some Western screech owl nestlings. They were found on a trail in Cayucas, and we were able to put them back. The people who found them were able to take us right back to where they had fallen, and we could find the nest. I think you've had Bob Peake speak to you, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about his renesting. We love Bob. He does a wonderful job. He's extremely conscientious. He makes sure those parents are there and feeding. This was a common raven that fell out of a very tall tree, and Bob sometimes climbs himself, but in this case, he had someone put the baby back, and so here he is. Here's the baby back in the nest, and then Bob always makes sure the parents are continuing to feed the baby. And this was another one. This was a golden eagle, and it was some of your members, I believe, who were aware of this baby, were aware of the nest, and we brought him to us. And he had fallen 45 feet, and so our vet wanted to hang on to him for a little while to make sure that he wasn't injured. He wasn't. He had a full crop when he came into us. You can see he's already got his talons. So after 4 days, the Greenvale Tree Company put him back. And again, we were really fortunate because there were people who were aware of him and watching his nest, and he was being fed and cared for. This is another whiteboard for our isolation room. The isolation room is just where we keep animals who are still requiring care, and so have to be easily grabbed, basically, and so they can be treated. So they're in smaller cages. We have stainless steel wall cages. Again, the cages are always covered. These are the charts I was talking about that follow the animal. These are the med trays that someone came up with. They're really convenient. These are syringe holders that have been cut and Velcroed to this board. And so each square is an animal and the meds that they're on and the amount that they're on. And when it's busy, these are full, and sometimes it takes 2 trays for each room, but they're just easily carried. They're made up in that in the intake room in the morning, and then again in the afternoon, because most animals are on meds twice a day. So these are some of the animals that might be in the ISO room. This is a long-tailed weasel, some baby possums. We do have a fawn enclosure that is way on the backside of the property because fawns are such high-stress animals, but we don't keep fawns at the center. We have someone out in Santa Margarita who does all of our fawns. So as soon as they are no longer under vet care, they're sent to her. But in the meantime, they're put way out where they're not disturbed by the activities of the center. And another animal that is a very high stress animal are bunnies. And so we have two volunteers who regularly do home care for our bunnies. So they are not, as hard as we try to keep things quiet at the center, it's still, there's a lot of activity going on all the time. So the bunnies go to home care. We also have Melinda Alvarado, who trains our volunteers to handle bats. And we're lucky to have her. She's very knowledgeable about bats. So again, bats are often taken off-site to home care. We get a fair number of snakes and reptiles, lizards, fence lizards, and this is a common king snake. But last year, I wasn't there. I heard the story that Dr. Riggs got a call at the center about a rattlesnake caught in garden netting, which is a lot of what we see are snakes caught in garden netting. And she went out, caught the rattlesnake, put it in a bucket, brought it back to the center, anesthetized the snake, removed the garden netting, and took the snake back. I thought that was very impressive. This is a common porwell. If you've never had close contact, they're fabulous birds. They are so well camouflaged. It's remarkable, and they have these this tiny bill with this enormous mouth, and they hiss at you if they are disturbed by you. So they're very interesting birds. This is a orphaned American kestrel. We get a lot of kestrels that come out of the nest before they can fly, and so people bring them to us, and usually it's a quick turnaround and we can get them back to the parents. Occasionally they are injured and we have to keep them longer. This is the surgery suite where Dr. Shannon does her work. We have a digital x-ray machine, we have an anesthesia machine, and an autoclave and recovery caging over here that you can't see. And here's some of this was a pelican whose lower beak was split. And this is after Dr. Riggs has repaired it. This is a crow that has a broken radius ulna, and this is called an external fixator. He also had a broken leg, a broken tibiotarsus, and it also has an external fixator. And I'll try to explain a little bit about the external fixator. I'm trying to move along and not take too much time, but this crow was eventually released. This is Dr. Riggs coping. She's trimming an eagle's beak because they tend to overgrow in captivity. And she also sharpens their talons because they also get dull in captivity. This is an American badger. He was hit by a car, and we found out later that he was also lead poisoned. He did not survive. This is a beaver. It's a funny story. There'll be more to this story if I can get to it. Our vet thinks he was caught by an eagle and dropped because he had some pretty bad wounds here on his hind end that were infected and had maggots in them. So he needed a lot of cleanup, antibiotics, pain meds. But he did recover. After about 10 days, she felt he could be released, and she had originally intended to send him to another center that handles beavers. This is just more pictures of the beaver. He weighed about 30 pounds. Here's his teeth. Anyway, you'll meet him again. This is a turtle, a Western pond turtle that had been hit by a car, and he was okay, except his carapace was split. So this was Dr. Riggs. She glued these picture hangers to the shell and then pulled it together with wire and tightened it so that the shell could grow back together, and he was eventually released. So this is the external fixator. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but this is a Cooper's hawk that had a fractured femur and a fractured tibiotarsus. And the way the bones are repaired now is, it used to be they just put a pin down the center of the bone, which is hollow, and that would hold the pieces together and then wait for the bone to heal. But the bone would sometimes twist because it was only in one plane. It could twist around that axis. So more recently, what they're doing are external fixators. So they put the pin down through the bone. You can see that here. And then they put horizontal pins coming out of the bone, and it's attached to a kind of a strut that parallels the bone and is made out of an epoxy that hardens. And so those pins go into that epoxy. So you basically have a really stable bone. And so these pins will be cut. These look really, this is a x-ray that was taken midway to see if they're placed properly, but all these will be cut. And then that straw with the epoxy in it will be put parallel to these, and these pins, these horizontal pins will go into it, and it will make it very stable. I'm sorry, I know that's not a great explanation, but there'll be another picture of one that you'll see. This is a hook in a Brandt's cormorant's throat that our vet needed to go in and retrieve. And this is Dr. Riggs pinning the wing of a gull under anesthesia. Dr. Riggs also does imping, which is not something that vets usually learn, but she learned it from a falconer. And so it's quite it takes a lot of patience, and it's an art as well as a science. If you think about having to get that perfect shape of the tail on a wing, getting the perfect foil of the wing so the bird gets the proper lift. It's done, you can only do it if there's part of a feather left, and she uses wooden skewers and inserts them into the feather on the bird that's receiving the feathers, and then donor feathers are attached to those skewers, and glue is used. So if you can imagine using feathers, glue, and a wild animal, and combining those and being able to come up with the bird with the feathers perfect. And the feathers have to be precisely where they came from on the donor bird. They have to go into the recipient bird because feathers are all differently shaped, as I'm sure you all know. It's quite an art. She does it. She's a master at it. I've watched her and I'm in awe of her ability to do it. But you also have to have feather banks. So she keeps feather banks. And here you can see how she's got her feathers arranged. I'm going to go through these really fast. These are our outdoor flights. So these are some of our aviaries. These are songbird aviaries, and some of the birds that might go in them: band-tailed pigeons, black-headed grosbeak, hummingbirds. This is our big flight 1, and it's about 98 feet long, and I think it's about 15 feet high. And these pools are old tomato trucks. If you've ever seen tomatoes being hauled, these were donated to us. And we use these daisy mats to protect the birds' feet, along with pea gravel. And the pools, any pools that we use for these birds have to be cleaned, filtered on a daily basis so the birds don't get their feathers fouled and lose their waterproofing. In this flight, we put pelicans and gulls and cormorants and turkey vultures. We were really happy to discover that the turkey vultures do just fine in there with all those seabirds. And other turkey vultures often come and visit when we have turkey vultures in this flight. They'll come and sit on top, and they seem to be visiting and keeping them company from what we can tell. This was a pool we had that we put live minnows in so that the herons, mostly herons, could practice fishing for live fish. So this is an elegant tern. We had this tern for quite some time. He had a fracture of his right radius ulna. And because they have to be such fabulous flyers, our vet held on to this bird for quite some time to be sure that his flight was good. But you'll be able to see an external fixator on this bird. And they're so stable that, as you can see, the bird can actually use his wing to some extent with that external fixator on. He's going to turn in a minute. You'll see that external fixator there. So that was a real game changer in pinning birds' wings so that they didn't twist, because once they would twist, the bird would have to be euthanized. This is feeding time for the pelicans. These were some of those juvenile pelicans that were unable to dive when we had those high winds that seemed to go on forever. It just seemed to make it really difficult for these juvenile pelicans. And this is our semi-aquatic enclosure, mostly for ducks. These are some of our flights that we use for raptors, although like everything else, they can be used for other things when necessary. You just change the furniture, basically. Here you can see some owls that are in them right now, and a lot of thought goes into aviaries and flights to make sure that the animals won't get injured in them, that the perches are wrapped appropriately so they don't get problems with their feet. And they're also protected from the noise and activity outside around the center. Here's some barn owls in one of the flights. This is another one of our flights, and made basically for raptors, but we also use it for egrets and herons when it's needed. These are our pelagic pools. These were the Hind Foundation donated one of these pools. I'm not sure, they may have donated both the pools. I'm sorry that I don't know that because I should. And these pools they're about 8 feet high and the water is 5 feet deep, and they've got nets on top of them, and they're specifically for pelagic birds. So here we have a Pacific loon, western grebe, and common murre in the hind pool. And this is a common loon in the hind pool. And you can see when they dive, they go right around the edge of the pool. And we know the birds are ready to go when they're waterproof and when we have a terrible time catching them, which we do. This is because we don't have any large flights, we do something called creance, which is flying birds on a 150-foot line. And we were taught how to do this by a wonderful falconer named Brad Felger, who saved us when we were getting, before we had a center, we were getting, for some reason, one year we got 12 golden eagles and didn't know how to handle them, didn't have a place to fly them. So he worked with us, taught us how to handle the eagles and how to fly them on a long line so we could exercise them. So we put these anklets and jesses on them and then attach the 150-foot line. And this was in the early days. We didn't have any place to fly them, so we would actually drive around. This is a golden eagle with his hood on, asking ranchers if we could fly in their fields, and often they would let us, and so it actually worked out. But sometimes we would have to fly them on a baseball field, which is what we're doing here. This is me and Melinda Alvarado taking that eagle around. This was a spotted owl chick that was banded up in Humboldt, and in the banding, they dislocated the bird's hand, his metacarpals. And so he was sent down to Dr. Riggs to see if she could fix those metacarpals. It was a very long time. It took him a while to heal, and then he needed physical therapy, and then we flew him on the creance. Several of us also went back to the Minnesota Raptor Center, where they have a creance program, and they set all the parameters for flying the birds, for how often to fly, based on blood work that they do. And so this bird was eventually sent back to Humboldt and released. This is flying a red-tailed hawk on a creance, and then I'll have one quick video flying on a creance. So we video them in slow motion so that we can evaluate their mechanics and make sure that their wings are symmetrical. We want their tail flat. We want their feet up or feet down. We just don't want 1 foot up and 1 foot down. That's an indication of a problem. And then we can show our vet the video, and she can evaluate how she thinks the bird is doing. And this is a great horned owl also being flown on a creance. And some birds get conditioned very quickly, and others take quite a long time. This is a prairie falcon after a creance, at the end of a creance flight. This is our mammal caging. I'll go through this pretty quickly. So there's quite a number of cages within this, this outdoor caging, and we put everything from raccoons, squirrels, foxes, bobcats. What else do we put in there? That may be just about everything. Here's a bobcat. We have a bobcat right now that we're not sure what's going to happen to, because he acts too tame, and we're not sure. He was head injured. We're not sure if maybe he was kept as a pet or if it's a result of a head injury, but he's still being evaluated to figure out what we're going to do with him. Oh, sorry. It's a juvenile coyote and a gray fox. The squirrels we raise in these squirrel boxes, and then the boxes are taken out when we release them and attached to a tree in the release area. And so they have this sort of safe home that they can slowly come out and get to know their territory. This is a baby striped skunk. And the best possible outcome, of course, is release. So this is that beaver that I showed you. So Dr. Riggs took this beaver back up to the Paso Robles treatment plant and released him. So this is that release.
Hi, Claudia. Just letting you know you got 15-minute warning.
Okay, and I'm right at the end.
Awesome. Thank you.
As you can see, the beaver tried to bite Dr. Riggs and tried to bite her again. She wasn't hurt, so it all turned out all right. This is a great horned owl that came to us. He fell into a horse trough, so he was just wet, sopping wet. So we dried him off and he was released the following evening. So this is that release. This was a golden eagle that came to us. It was hit by a car, a juvenile male golden eagle. And he had a left wing fracture. He was in care for 145 days. And that included 6 weeks. We sent him down to the Ojai Raptor Center. She has a 150-foot flight, big enough for eagles. And then they haze them around the flight to make sure that they get conditioned. And then the bird was sent back to us. So this is this juvenile golden eagle's release. And this was a white pelican that was found in Cuesta Inlet. He was wrapped in fishing line and he had 2 large treble hooks embedded in his right leg. And the line around his wing, fishing line is unforgiving, and so it cut into his wing. So there was some constriction damage to his leg. He required a lot of wound care, antibiotics, pain medication, and we would rest his legs in a warm water pool for periods of time during the day. So we had him for a little over a month. This is at the estuary. You all probably know that. We have a white pelican right now. They are so huge. They're just really big birds. Oops. So these are some brown pelicans that we were releasing, and they're off. Thank you. I'm sorry. I know I go through this really fast. There's a lot to cover, and I do apologize for that, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Claudia, for that fabulous presentation. There was one question. It says it's about baby owls, and are there any problems with them imprinting for the baby owls?
There can be. There is a period when they can imprint. Usually the owls that we get are past that point, but nevertheless, we do cover ourselves when we feed them so that they aren't associating food with humans. So we have like, it's like a camouflage suit with eye holes. The ones that we have right now can actually eat on their own. They can eat chopped up mice out of a dish. And so we're not having to hand feed them. But it is a concern that, and we are aware of it.
Okay, I don't see any more, no more questions. Lots of great presentation. Awesome. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate your work.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, I'm sorry for going through so fast, but I knew I had to get a lot in. So thank you again for having us.